afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining our meetup today. So Jess and I are leading today's discussion looking at the untapped power of interaction personality. So last week, we explored what makes the perfect customer interaction. And we broke down all the moving parts that go into delivering the perfect interaction. And today, we are going to be looking at one of the solutions that play a specific and an important role in helping businesses deliver better interactions that are tailored to their individual customers. So this solution that we are looking at today is interaction personality and the role it plays specifically in personalizing and improving customer journeys and how it enables businesses to deliver the right customer interaction within these journeys. So as I mentioned, Jason and myself are going to be leading this discussion. If there are any questions, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A. And if you would like to be made a participant, please raise your hand and Nicola will make you a contributor for the session. We will be saving a few minutes at the end to go through questions. So with that said, I am going to get into the presentation today. To begin, we are going to look at the customer journey, specifically through the lens of what we spoke about last week, which was where we looked at the moving parts of a customer interaction. So just as a quick recap, I'm not sure for new faces, looking at the perfect customer interaction essentially means we looked at all the parts like a touch point, the channel, the timing, and the tone. And we broke down all those moving parts even further to look at what makes something the right touch point. So this looking at the right touch point, the deliverable, did we make a recommendation and offer a nudge? We then looked at things like the action associated with that touch point. What exactly do you want the customer to do? And then the cost associated with completing that action. So does it actually cost money to sign up for a new product, or does it cost the customer's time and attention? So we looked at all those aspects associated with these different parts that go into making the perfect interaction. We then also looked at the strategic goals that go into deciding an interaction or delivering an interaction, like the customer lifecycle. What stage does the customer sit within their relationship to the business? What business value does the business want from this customer at this specific stage? And with that business value, what is the intended outcome that the business wants in order to achieve that business value? So we looked at all of that from the perspective of a single customer interaction. But now we are looking at a customer journey. So what exactly is a customer journey? Well, this is the full series of touch points and steps that a person takes with a brand or a business or a product or a service across the customer lifecycle. So it can start from before they're even go right through to when they are a loyal advocate and they are actually using the product or the service. And this journey then follows a series of steps that the customer takes to engage with the business through different channels. So looking at this through the lens of what we discussed last week, we spoke about, a bank, for example, making a product recommendation, such as a new savings account. Let's say this is delivered through an app that says sign up for a new savings account. The person sees this recommendation. They then are taken on a journey in order to complete and sign up and open this new account that they have with their bank. So this can be a whole journey, like seeing the notification, clicking on it, opening the app, navigating to accounts, opening new account, filling it in, and then right through to that successful, you have opened your account type of page. So that is essentially kind of what a journey would look like. You start with the single interaction, and then the customer goes on a journey in order to complete the intended action. So I also want to make a note here that, as I mentioned earlier, customer journeys happen across the customer lifecycle. So I think we're all pretty familiar with what exactly the customer lifecycle is. Just as a quick recap, it's essentially the broader strategic view that asks, what is our customer's relationship with us as a business or a product or service at this specific moment in time? And what's most important about looking at the customer lifecycle is that it helps organize business goals per stage. I keep repeating the term business, but essentially what value does the business want for the customer and from the customer at this specific stage? And business value can be very different given these stages. When we're looking at the early start, the start of the customer lifecycle, awareness is considered valuable. Whereas if we move further down the line and we look at the retention stage, loyalty is considered valuable. Sometimes the ability to upsell and cross-sell is also considered valuable. And in that case, that's actually revenue and profit for the business. That's the value there. So given that we have these different goals per stage within the customer lifecycle, there are then different journeys that the customer can take in order to realize that business value. So if we look at something like converting or downloading an app, for example, and becoming an engaged customer, moving from that onboarding activation stage right through to the kind of engaged stage. So let's say, for example, a customer has signed up for a bank and opened an account with a bank, and you now want them to download the app so that they can start engaging with them and they can start, making full benefit and use of the service that they have just signed up for. The process will then essentially look like account opened, download the app, fill in the details, navigate to accounts, and then receive a welcome message. That is a journey that a customer can take within a specific stage that takes them from one stage to the next. We then also have smaller journeys within these stages of the customer lifecycle. So if we look, for example, at the retention stage, this is where your customer is actively using your products and your service. They want to complete a specific task. So if they have an account with a bank, they may want to make a payment or make a transfer. Given that they have this task that they want to complete, they are then taken on a journey to complete said task. So let's say you want to settle pay a friend, transfer money to a friend. You then have to open the app, authenticate using your biometrics, navigate to accounts, specify account details, specify amount, you fill out a form, then you click confirm, and then payment, and then you receive like a tick. On my banking app, I receive like a payment successful page. And that is essentially an example of two different journeys, one that can take you from being an engaged customer to an activated customer, and then one is another journey that just any customer can take when accessing the service that they pay for. The most important point that I want to make here with these two different examples is that every journey is designed with some sort of outcome and value in mind. So sometimes it's as simple as ensuring that the customer can complete the task with the least amount of friction and that they are satisfied and it's easy to do. And sometimes it's a kind of greater end goal in mind, which is getting a customer to buy a new product or sign up for something or be made aware of something. So every journey here that we take a customer on has some sort of business goal in mind. So if we take a step back, we've essentially established that a customer journey isn't just a sequence of steps. It's essentially a path designed towards an outcome. And that then carries value for both the customer and the business. And the difference between a good journey and a broken journey is essentially whether the customer actually moves through this journey with confidence, ease, and it's as frictionless as possible. And at the end of it, they are satisfied and it felt like it worked for them. And that then brings us to the next part of this discussion, which is looking at where these different journeys actually play out on a day-to-day basis. Because for most modern enterprises, such as like a bank or a telco, they are essentially using an app to do this. There's obviously different channels that you can have, such as a website, but today we are going to specifically be looking at an app. I'm sure we all have either a banking app or we have an app where we buy data, like our telecommunications app, whatever it may be. But just for a little bit of context, an app, which is short for application, is essentially software that's designed to run on a mobile device, specifically like a smartphone or a tablet. Most importantly here is that it's installed directly onto the device, unlike a website. And what this direct installation does is it gives the app access to native device capabilities, like your push notifications. That's really important. Your GPS, your biometric authentication, and even offline functionality. And the reason that this matters is because all these different capabilities give a business more ways to interact with their customers, respond, engage, and essentially guide them in real time. And the example that I was thinking of when looking at why an app is so important is because it's essentially like having a customer come day in and day out into your store to see what's happening, to see what's new, to see what's going on. I remember when I was a student, I would take the bus to university and I would get dropped off right by Cavendish. So every day I would walk through Cavendish and I would walk through the same store every day just to see what was going on. I never bought anything. Obviously, I was a student, but I felt like they appreciated that I would come in and day out. And then when I was ready to buy something and I had the funds, I would. And that is essentially what an app is like. It's like having a customer there 24/7. They're coming into your store and seeing what's happening. So this is incredibly valuable because if you have this customer coming in and day out, you then want to be able to engage them and guide them through a specific journey, given the goal or the intended outcome that you have. So as we've kind of established, is that this app plays an incredibly important role in looking at where journeys can succeed or sometimes fail. So looking at a high quality mobile app, it can essentially become that channel, that central channel that improves that experience in these journeys at every stage. So if we look at the discovery and awareness stage, this is essentially the first owned digital space that a brand has with the customer. Once they've downloaded it, it's on their phone, the icon lives there, and you can start building that relationship with the customer. If we look at things like use and engagement, this is where the app starts to truly deliver value and the customer reaches that aha moment, which is where they're like, oh, this is exactly why I've signed up for said bank and why I have an account with them, because I can engage with them daily and perform the tasks that I need to fairly easily. The journeys are frictionless. And there's also contextual interactions within this engagement stage that the bank or the business can then deliver to their customers to make that whole customer experience feel a lot more valuable. And if it's valuable for the customer, it's definitely valuable for the business. So just to kind of give you a little sum, the app is both this, it's a tool that lets the customer do what they need to do. It's a functional tool, but it's also a very important strategic channel where businesses can achieve a lot of value. And it's also a space where effective journeys are shaped. So to drive this point home, the app essentially is a channel that is convenient and accessible. It ensures that customers are constantly engaged, and it's also a space for value generation. Whatever the goal may be, whether it's awareness, loyalty, engagement, or even in some cases, profit, making a customer more profitable. So now that we understand what the process of a customer journey is, looking at it in terms of the customer lifecycle, and now looking at the channel where this all takes place, this leads us to the question, which is, how exactly are we designing journeys within these app spaces? And the current approach today is UX-led, user experience design. And it's fundamentally what UX is about shaping a product or the journey so that it meets user expectations and it supports this intuitive interaction. It has to be as frictionless as possible. So it focuses on things like mapping user goals and flows into functional screens. It also looks at enhancing usability and engagement, and then reducing cognitive friction and frustration or cognitive load. And then it also improves that efficiency and satisfaction when it comes to completing tasks. So user experience is very much foundational to journey creation. Without it, there isn't much of a journey there. But it's important to note here that a lot of the current approaches to user experience revolve around designing for a mass average customer. And that is essentially where user experience tends to fall short. The main limitation here is that the current approach to user experience and design is that it's static and it's not necessarily personalized to each and every individual customer. The main aim of UX is to map idealized user flows, and it assumes this rational progression through a predefined path for this mass average user. But that's not necessarily the way all people behave. We are emotional, we get distracted, we are context driven, also inconsistent. So if a UX flow kind of assumes this linear journey, when in reality customers don't really take linear paths, it's not really sufficient anymore. People are variable. So looking specifically at the variability of people, it comes down to their behavior. So when we look at things like some users will download an app and they will use it purely for explorative purposes. I love going onto my banking app and just clicking around and seeing what they have to offer, but I like just seeing what's there. Others do not waste their time doing that. If they need to make a transfer, they log on and complete what they need to do. Some rely on pattern recognition. They don't want anything to change. They know if I click here, click here, click here, this task will be completed. So with all these different ways that we all interact with our apps and our journeys, we can see that we all behave differently and we're all quite inconsistent. I may explore on a day-to-day basis, but sometimes I do need to complete a task. And in that instance, I complete it fairly quickly. My behavior has changed. I myself as an individual are variable. I'm variable and I change, but we're all very different. There is no mass average customer. And that said, the mass average customer will also tend to change. So if we accept that human behavior varies widely and that designing around a fixed idealized flow becomes insufficient, what is the better approach? I want to make a note here that the better approach is not to discard user experience. We keep it, we need it, but we recognize its boundary. The more effective approach combines user experience with behavioral design and adaptive intelligence. And that allows us to understand how users actually behave in these journeys, not how we expect them to behave. And with that, we can then begin to deliver interactions and shape outcomes as a business. So this then leads us to our solution that we are looking at today, which is interaction personality. So the question that we want to ask then is, how do we actually understand how people behave inside our apps? And to understand that, I'm going to call on Jessica, who is our very own in-house behavioral analyst and has spent a lot of time working and developing interaction personality and understanding all its moving parts. So I'm going to ask Jess one question to begin, which is, can you please tell us what is interaction personality, and can you give us a breakdown of how it works?
Hey, Maddie, thank you so much. Hello, everyone. Fundamentally, interaction personality is a way to identify, understand, and ultimately class or segment customers by their interaction rhythms. So one of the easiest ways to describe this is to look at how people interact within specific digital environments. You've already given us a great view of an app, but I mean, this could also be within a web space, particularly if you have some kind of a login or journey capabilities in the background of that. But for the sake of keeping to theme, let's explore an app idea, an app concept. So, within an app, every human, a customer they are a human, they have their own set of behavioral footprints in terms of how they explore or don't within an app. So you've given a prime example of how you like to explore an app. I personally don't spend that much time exploring apps, but this does depend on the company or the reason for the existence of the app. If we look at it across the board of different sort of app types, you've got people that will fall in between those two spectrums as well. Some people may prefer to just take their time wandering through an app, taking very deliberate steps, not necessarily having any level of speed. Or you've got people that would prefer to learn about the offerings and get sort of the most out of what's in that space. So you'll often find that with apps that have got some level of gamification, and you've got a relatively competitive personality type that's quite eager to get involved in all of that. And that's a personal personality type, not quite our interaction or digital personality as we're talking through at the moment. But yeah, others then may, on the other side, they would prefer to go in and perform a specific action. There is an intention in mind as to, I will be in to do this one thing and then I want to leave. But then you've got other people that will also have certain sets of actions that they will come in with. This kind of personality is normally sort of indicated by people that prefer to wait until there are a certain number of things that they need to perform before they feel the urgency of, okay, cool, I'm going to go to my app now and I'm going to, for a banking example, I'm going to make a payment. I'm going to check my balance on my credit card. I'm going to check my limits. There's like a set of events that will happen. And you'll find that there will be this sort of like ritualistic nature with which they do that. But yeah, the ultimate idea is that they would like go in and perform an action and then leave. Interaction personality is an algorithm that can understand all of these nuances. And it uses a series of metrics or variable metrics in order to define the levels with which a person exhibits tendencies towards one of the 6 personality or the ecosystem personalities. I'm sure that there's a lot of people on this call that already know very well about them, but if I can just list them here. So we have our baseline introverts, the extreme of which are our intentionals. And then you have the middlings, which are the industrious. And then you've got your baseline extroverts, the extreme of which are the experientials. And then there are enthusiastics as well. Now, within each time frame of an app journey or any kind of a time frame that's normally set by a data scientist using this module, so using the interaction personality module, within that time frame, it will produce a personality score. And this personality score would put somebody on a spectrum to indicate the levels at which it exhibits these ecosystem personalities. So are you a top-end enthusiastic or a relatively low-end enthusiastic? So in this way, every person or customer ultimately has all of the personalities that they are scored against. You would just then take, or it would generate a score that's then associated with a tag based on whatever you set those tag expectations to be. So for example, if you have customers that score high in industrious and extroversion, you would decide whether you're going to label them as an extrovert industrious or if it's just going to be one of those certain personality types. The point is the score provides you with a defined tag. And this tag can then be used to trigger one of a few different things. So, I mean, just to provide a couple of examples of how it could be used in a real-time sense, this tag could be pulled through into real-time dashboards. In our case, I mean, if you were to be using the ecosystem environment, it would be pulling it through into a Grafana dashboard where you can ultimately tag and track specific groupings of customers in order to see how they fluctuate over time and thereby get a view of real in the moment changes in interaction. This could be quite helpful around campaigns and very time specific activities that you have. And one of the other things that it could do also in a dashboard example is to be pulled through into our superset dashboards, which are usually for business understanding. So in this case, it would give you a much larger time frame to tell you what groupings of people have either transitioned from one personality to another or the massive groupings that you have. So often what we'll find within banking examples is that people tend to be more people that are an industrious personality. So that's kind of like your average is the industrious personality, but we still then account for the existence of the other personalities within that set environment. And then, yeah, that can also be used by analysts. It can be used to understand who each of the personalities are. You can use that to then cross-correlate. Are there personalities that are particularly fond of certain products? Are there personalities that are quite averse to specific types of notifications? You can really use it to learn so much more about your customers. It can also, and this I think is the more exciting space, it can also be used to trigger responses in real time. So this would be that like in journey example of triggering, you know, we know that this person is an intentional or an industrious, and we have assigned this particular special offer to our industrious customers. So as it scores you as an industrious within your bank journey, it would then present you with this offer. So there's a very exciting sort of real-time offer presentation aspect to it as well. And the thing that's important about that is that it triggers it automatically. It's not necessarily you sitting in the back end and going, okay, cool, X number of people are industrious based on historic methods and X number of people are going to get this offer right here. No, it does it while you're interacting. So yeah, it ultimately creates a way in which you can personalize journeys with customers by creating an extra level of segmentation, but that's based on how they behave within that digital space. So just to call a comparison to our spend personality, obviously spend personality is just about how you spend. You often find that spend personality doesn't necessarily work so well in real time. It's sort of, you've got time frame windows. So it could be like a week or a month usually, because you see how people will spend habitually over monthly time frames. Whereas interaction personality is really an opportunity to do things in real time.
There is one thing that I want to draw attention to, which you spoke about now, and it was about how given certain personalities, okay, this personality prefers this type of recommendation or offer or notification, and this personality doesn't. And I'm hoping what you can do for us here is, can you give us a view of these two kind of polar opposite personalities and explain two very different personalities? Maybe it's, intentional and experiential, just to give us a clearer view of that variability in human behavior, so that we can then understand, okay, how do we make a recommendation to this personality and how do we make a recommendation to this one? What are the differences there?
I mean, you've definitely pegged the two most polar personalities. So those are the ones in the extremes, like I mentioned now. So your intentionals are your extreme introverts based on our framework, and your experientials are your extreme extroverts. Now, you can have sort of your ambivert characters or personality types, which is your industrious and your enthusiastic. But I guess for the sake of your question, it definitely makes more sense to look at the more extreme options. Now, I just want to make a note. I mean, before I go into explaining this too much, like there are people that tend to fall more within the center. So you'll often find that, I mean, to bring this up over here, we've got our example of an intentional customer. A perfect example of an intentional customer is a customer that comes in and they want to get to the point. They will perform as few steps as possible in order to come to an outcome. So you can see the little dancing man in the corner there. That's an action, right? So that's an action that was performed while they were in this space. And they took a total of 1, 2, 3, 4 steps in order to get to that action, 2 of which is linked directly to the action itself. In other words, it's you clicking on a product and clicking, yes, I want this, and then success triggers the action. In other words, they took 2 navigational steps and then did something about it and then left. So that is a prime example of an intentional personality. They don't want to be offered something prior to performing that action. They don't want to be bombarded with any kind of information that has nothing to do with the action at hand. They are very much interested in, okay, cool, I'm here for a purpose, right? And the intentional personalities are quite, I feel like they're definitely the majority of people that will, come in and just click through whatever offers are presented. Because, I mean, it's very common at the moment to, when you open your app, you get presented with a pop-up and then a banner, and then you have to navigate through a series of like screens that are making offers at you. They will never, ever, ever look at them. Even if there's something worth any kind of relevance to them, they just won't look at it because they are action oriented. Now, an enthusiastic customer or enthusiastic personality, on the other hand, will often invite redirections. So they will sort of go in almost hoping that there's going to be something interesting to experience or interesting to explore within that space. So the experiential customer will oftentimes, as is shown over here, they will have their directional entry point to get them towards an action. But then they're more likely to take a series of steps after that action in order to perform another action, and then maybe poke around a little bit more and then perform another action. So you'll see in this exploded view over here, this customer has actually gone, you can see how the groupings there for those first 3 little bubbles there as they enter the journey. That's a set of steps that they took. And then they took an interaction step to get them to another point where they took a series of steps and only then performed an action. So you can see there's this like willingness to experience the space that is the app, and willing to experience what is on offer. And I mean, that first few set of steps there could potentially have been them clicking on one of these offers that gets presented to them as they come in, and realizing, oh, okay, maybe that's not so interesting, clicking on another offer and actually performing an action on that offer over there. But then they will continue to sort of like bounce between that sort of like action and explore and action and explore. So you'll even see the last action that's performed, they still then go on to take 2 more navigational steps in the app, where normally you could just have your action and leave, as is shown with the intentional customer.
Do you know what I'm thinking of while you're talking about these two kind of different views of a customer and the value of why it's important to understand these two different personalities? You know, I think it was the intentional, they don't really look at their recommendations. They'll click, 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 and then they'll do what they need to do. The example that comes to my mind, bear with me, it's a bit of an odd one, is like an airport. As kind of travelers, we all go through the same airport. I'm thinking of like the Emirates one, which is you go down the escalator and then you have to walk through all the department stores to get to your gate. You take the same journey. If I land early or, you know, flights on time, you kind of stroll, you look around, you look at the perfumes, the chocolates, and then you go to your gate. For someone who isn't, you know, they're late for their flight, they are running. You wouldn't do that because you have the context to say, okay, this person is sprinting, they're missing their flight, like I'm not going to interrupt them. And that's easy because you can see it in person where people, we can understand and pick up on social cues and context. But in an app space, you can't really do that. It's a little bit difficult. And what interaction personality here does is essentially says, you know, this person is sprinting. Don't try and recommend them a product. It's not going to work. But at the end of the journey, once they've completed their task, they're interested. Whereas someone who's exploring is looking at the chocolates and the perfume and everything. Like, make a product recommendation, guide them through a journey that you think will work best for them, where they will then complete the action.
Yeah, definitely.
I think that kind of gave us a good view of, okay, these are two polar opposite personalities. Here's how their journeys differ and how you can then kind of personalize and ensure that it's contextually relevant for those different personalities. Now, the next thing that I want to look at is dynamic journeys, because we've unpacked, you know, the customer journey and the customer lifecycle in the app space, and now we've looked at interaction personality and how different people interact differently through this app, and why a static journey doesn't necessarily, you know, work for different personalities, because it's like one size fits all. So there's this new approach, which is essentially a dynamic journey. And this is a more kind of flexible, data-driven journey that then adapts to how the customer behaves and engages across channels, whether it's a website or, in this case, an app. It doesn't necessarily follow a fixed, predetermined flow like a static journey. And instead, it looks at these individual experiences, for example, personalities, and then based on their real-time actions or behavioral signals, preferences, and context, it can then adapt and change. And in essence, it's dynamic. So it doesn't necessarily assume a path, it responds to the person. Now, my question then is, how does interaction personality then facilitate the creation of these dynamic journeys?
That's an interesting question. Honestly, the dynamic journey space is really exciting. And I guess I can answer that in 2 ways. It both impacts the creation of the journeys and also enhances it. So you don't necessarily have to use the interaction personality in order to design the journey, but you can embed the interaction personality into that journey. So let me give an example here. A dynamic journey is a space in which you have various different journeys and various different options that can be taken at any given point in time, right? So you can have a dynamic journey without a personality, but it's very much then based on what are the actions that have been taken and how will that determine the recommendations or the interventions or the incentives that are offered as you're following down that path. Now, a great example of people or businesses or companies that have done dynamic journeys extremely well is obviously your Netflix and your Spotify, where it ultimately contextually derives the direction that you're going to be going in. So it doesn't say to you, as you already mentioned now, is sort of like traditional UX journeys, that this should lead to this is going. How do we create an environment in which, you know, your preference for, I don't know, mountain-based posters is going to lead you to more movies that have mountainous themes, you know, to give a Netflix example. But then to tie it back into this interaction personality, using interaction personality within the dynamic journey allows you to create and craft the right possible pathways for those personalities. So let's take it, for example, what we were talking about now with the intentional personality. I mean, they're a great person or a great type to form these examples around, in that, like we said already, you know, the intentional personality does not like to be offered to prior to performing an action. So what would happen is that your dynamic journey would have a series of potential trigger points throughout the journey that then ensure that when this customer is sprinting, and you don't want to sell them perfume in the airport itself, you rather wait until they're on the plane and then you attempt that sale. So I love your example, by the way. It's excellent. It works really well. I love these, like, you know, real world examples to describe these digital activities. But you would have somebody that would then come in, they're in search of performing an action, and when they perform that action and they get that, like, well done, congratulations, you've made your transfer, it was successful, on that exact card that it gets presented to you on, you would then provide them with an offer, because now they're feeling good, they're feeling positive, they're like, okay, cool, I've come in, I performed my action, I'm going to tick that off of my own personal list of things to do, and oh, okay, look, this is actually quite interesting and it's quite relevant to me. But the thing that's important about the dynamic journey narrative is it's those possible points in the journey in which you can have an interaction or an intervention. And so what you can do is, for an intentional personality type, you would define 3 potential trigger points for offer. Potential trigger point number 1 is shortly after they land in the app, and you can determine what their trajectory is within the first 2 steps that they take on that app. If they've taken a very direct approach towards an action, trigger point number 1 gets excluded. Trigger point number 2 becomes, you know, if they seem to be slowing down a little bit or lagging a little bit before they actually perform the action, and it's not because they're struggling to input a number or something like that, but you can tell that there's evidence of the fact that they're still on the edge of maybe performing this action or not, that would be trigger point number 2. And if they're showing a tendency towards this, then you would make an offer or some kind of a nudge, something to help them along either the journey that they're already on or potentially something else that would be more relevant to them. And then, you know, trigger point number 3 would be after they've performed the action itself. Now, what you've done there is that you've determined potentials, but you haven't said that all of these potentials will be enacted. You base it on the context of the steps that they take prior to landing at that point. Now, something about the interaction personality, which is also really useful within this space, is that, you know, it looks at things such as, you know, for one example, the time at which it takes you to move between steps. And time is vitally important in this sense. So if you are, to use the example now, like having a particularly intentional day, then that would fundamentally change the path that you're on. Now, for an enthusiastic personality or an experiential personality even, you know, they would welcome that level of variation. You would actually, more likely for an experiential personality, have more opportunities for trigger points within their journey and more branches off that you can send them on, and then potentially send them back to the point that they were on so that you can curate it. But you ultimately let the interaction personality in the system define what those directions are.
I liked what you said there, because I think it highlights how this dynamic journey plus the personality is really great for fixing the pitfalls of a static journey, which was, you said, there's triggers. It doesn't mean to say that every trigger will be enacted. Whereas a static journey essentially says, like, this will be done here now, and this recommendation will be made at this point, and it's all predefined. Whereas with the dynamic journey, with the interaction personality, it kind of takes those different paths, which is a really great way to kind of augment and improve the pitfalls of static UX. I see we do have 10 minutes left. So I do want to get to our next point, which is then taking the step further, which is we've looked at static journeys and those types of customer journeys. We've looked at how interaction personality can help us understand how people move within those spaces. We've now looked at dynamic journeys. And the next thing to look at is conversational journeys, which is a new approach that we've been speaking about for quite a while. So I won't go into too much detail about what it is, but just as a bit of a recap and summary, it's essentially a kind of conversational journey where the customer experience or the interaction is entirely driven through dialogue. This is something that we have shown before, and I do have a video clip, which I'll show a little bit later, where you can complete tasks and actions the way you would through a conversational interface, like a chatbot or a voice assistant or a live chat. And it feels a lot less like a transactional flow, and it's more like a natural exchange. So instead of navigating these predefined screens and steps, you move through the journey, whatever it may be, make transfer, read about information or whatever it is, entirely through conversation. So I'm going to quickly pull up a video. I just need to change my screen sharing. It'll be a clip from the last meetup that we hosted. Can everyone see my screen? There's not going to be sound, but you can see here in what I'm going to show you is Ramsey's essentially opened up this chat interface, and the customer has said, what's in my account? What transactions have I made? And here you can see he now says, I want to pay someone. And then in this instance, the conversational journey will say, select which account you want to make the payment from. And in this case, he'll say, I think it's credits. There we go. And then it'll say, who do you want to pay to? And he'll say current. Let's just see if he types that. And then you specify the amount that you want to pay. So this is just a little bit of a snippet. I'm not going to show the full thing because we are running out of time, but this is essentially just a little snippet of what a conversational journey can look like. I just want to go back to my slide now. Okay, so now that we've looked at a kind of a conversational journey, just a little snippet of how it works, the important thing that I want to make a note of here is that a conversational journey essentially changes the entire approach of how customers move through a journey and how they interact, because instead of defining, in a static journey, a set of steps that the customer has to take, and then in a dynamic journey, a set of steps that may change based on the customer's context, what a conversational journey is flip that entirely, and it essentially gives full control, to the customer, and it lets them take full control of the journey itself through conversation. And the example that we often discuss in relation to this kind of turning a customer journey on its head is the Apple example. I might have to call on Nicola for this, but I'll try and explain it to the best of my ability. Back in the day, it was Nokia, and Nokia was essentially predefined because it had the screen and then the keyboard was in the way. And what that did was force users and also app developers to then kind of fit within the mold of the screen and the keyboard in the way. There wasn't this flexibility and freedom to do what the developer or the customer wanted. And then Apple flipped that and said, we are not going to force any constraints onto someone. We're going to give them the blank canvas to do what they want, whether it's app development or your layout, how you choose to navigate on your phone and all of that. I'm sure there's a better way to explain it, and we'll definitely have Nicola talk us through that in another meetup. But essentially, this is a new approach, this conversational journey. And now I want to ask Jess, how exactly can interaction personality work within this conversational journey?
Oh, Maddie, I think you did a great job with the Nokia Apple thing. I really do. Everybody knows.
Yeah, I definitely wouldn't have done a better job.
I appreciate it. Thank you. I'm busy thinking, what did Nokia do? Was that keyboard in the way?
Oh my gosh, is that pre your time?
Yes.
So when we move into the conversational journey space, the only sort of real fundamental change is obviously natural language. It is a profound difference, but there's still a lot of the same sort of mechanisms that can be used in the back end with regards to interaction personality. So it would just be a case of then having this conversational space detect the intent and then provide those offers in such a way that haven't necessarily been predefined like you would with the static journey or even with a dynamic journey. So just to give a visual idea, a static journey, a static UX journey would be like a roadmap, right? It just gives you a point from this point to that point over there. It's kind of like when somebody draws you a map to get to the shops. Draw your little robots and you go, okay, cool, here's your path. There are potential splits off, but you don't want to pay any attention to those because they've got nothing to do with getting to the shops. Your dynamic journey is you building out a map of possibilities. It's you providing shops over here, over there, and then like mapping out all of the potential roads to those shops, right? Conversational is very much just like, here's the entire map. You can go absolutely anywhere, but the fundamental crux of it still sort of remains the same. You still determine or define points within this massive map of potentials in which interventions can be had or nudges can be had. What works particularly well with the conversational journeys is that you actually kind of build for everyone, and then you map for anyone within those spaces. So you'll have on this greater map of conversational opportunities, you will set up, okay, these are the potential triggers for each of the different personality types. These are the potential triggers for combinations of personality types. And yeah, it also then, the interaction personality can also then help to determine the frequency or the speed at which you have your interaction presented to you. So, you know, what is the nature of the response to that thing? So in our conversational banking example over there were no real prompts to the next step. I mean, that was very much an intentional journey. It was very much, they will determine exactly what it is that they want to do within that space. But if you've got a personality type that's a little bit more inclined to want to follow direction, recommendations, or hints, you can then add in, you know, would you like me to do this for you? So it detects that intent and it returns it to you in such a way that all you actually need to do is respond yes or no, rather than you sort of determining that this is exactly what I want to do and this is exactly how I want to do it. And then it also offers a really, really, really great opportunity to learn from the customer and not just impose upon them. You can really get an opportunity to learn something more about what defines these personality types as well. And I think something that we don't necessarily talk about or don't necessarily mention is that we provide the framework within which these personalities exist, but the companies and the businesses that implement them really refine the nature of the personalities within their space, because it's like saying that an introvert acts in a certain way. You're kind of just providing an overarching view of this hypothesis, and then you have to really sort of narrow that down. And so conversational journeys offer a very, very exciting way for all of this to be implemented and to be learned from as well.
I 100% agree. It is an exciting new way. And I really liked what you said there, which was, I think the crux of everything that we do, not just the presentation, was that it's an opportunity to learn more about the customer. I mean, I did obviously talk a lot about business value at the beginning, but I think when you adopt a truly customer-centric approach, and instead of saying, you know, what can we do and force upon this customer as a business, and you start saying, what does the customer want and need, and how can we best serve the customer by knowing them a lot better, that's really where you start to get the most business value. So I see we have 2 minutes, so I think I'm just going to kind of round off and close off today by saying we explored kind of one central idea, which was customer journeys are where a lot of value is created, or in some cases lost. And with, you know, this digital world that we live in, the app is one of the primary environments where these journeys unfold. We relied on UX traditionally to shape these journeys, but it often unfortunately fails because we look at UX looks at one average customer and decides a static journey that is supply side. What can the business do to lay out a set of steps for the customer? It doesn't ask who is our customer and how are they going to change. This is then where we looked at interaction personality and how it becomes so powerful, because it allows businesses to move beyond these assumptions and then actually understand who the customers are. Just as you said, Jess, gives the opportunity to learn more about customers within these journeys. And then once we understand this behavior, we can move from static journeys to dynamic journeys, and now into an entirely new space, which is conversational journeys, which gives complete power to the customer and then also creates opportunity to learn and know them a lot better. So that is essentially the approach for how businesses can get to know their customer better, create better customer journeys using obviously our solutions. So it is 5 o'clock on the dot, but I'm just going to open up the floor and see if there are any questions, if anyone has any comments or remarks.
That's excellent timing, Maddie.
No.
I'm really impressed.
We've really gotten good at this, haven't we? Yeah, but if there are no questions or comments, I'm going to say thanks.
So there was a note in the chat, but okay, that was just Moritz saying,
Please share the slide deck.
yes, please always at the slide deck.
Perfect. Any comments, thoughts? If not, happy Wednesday.
Absolutely. Guys, I hope everybody has a great rest of the day.
Thank you. See you next week.
Bye.
Bye.